Um, and, I know you deal with this kind of briefly in the book, maybe a little more towards the end in terms of historically why some of this comes to be, but especially because, early on when you talk a bit about how much more common this more beautiful view of salvation God was in the early centuries, why is it that you think sort of post-Augustine that this other worldview catches on the way that it is, gains the kind of is it about power? Is it about control? Like, how is this the version that catches fire for so much of the world?
Well, I think there are any number of reasons. One, I can, if, give me a few minutes here. I think I can lay out a few for you. One is, of course, institutional imperatives. I'm quite serious about that, that as the church became the church of the empire, a lot of the vagueness of early Christian belief had to be chased away. In the early centuries, I think the eschatological language is extremely rich, but not precise. Even Christ's teachings, if you look at the Gospels, what does Christ say about the world to come? He uses the sort of apocalyptic metaphors of his time from the intertestamental period. We've homogenized them and then turned them into a picture of a hell of eternal torment, because that's the picture we've inherited. But if you really go back and look at what Christ does, he's not giving us a single picture of anything, and certainly not that picture. When he talks about the Gehenna, which is often translated as hell, the Vale of Hinnom, he's thinking of it in terms of Isaiah, as a place where the worm doesn't die and the fire doesn't go out. But that doesn't mean, that's not a reference to an eternal state of torment. That's a Semitic idiom that just means this is a place of total destruction, where, the flesh is totally devoured, the bones are totally consumed. All right. So we have an image of destruction, not of eternal torment when Christ is talking about the Gehenna. We have images of destruction in furnaces, but then also we have images of exclusion, people being left out of the party, out of the wedding feast. Then we also have images of people being sent to debtor's prison or sent to a prison to be confined and tortured. But then those images always come with a finite sentence attached to them. When the price is paid, you get out, And what you should realize from all of that is that we're dealing with a first century apocalyptic Jewish idiom that's not pretending to tell us this or that about a specific eschatological image of the final, as say that you will have to reckon with God's justice one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I'm quite happy to see 1 Corinthians 3 as one among many New Testament images of that reckoning. Some will be proved by the fire and their works will stand. Some will have their works destroyed by the fire of divine love and justice, and they'll have to be saved through that fire. That's the way many of the fathers read that passage and applied it to the whole of eschatology. But by the end of the 4th century, I think it's fair to say that even though we have 4th century fathers telling us, Basil saying the majority of Christians, even in his time, in the late 4th century, are universalists. So at least in his quarter of the Eastern Christian world, there's a good chance that the majority opinion was not, was not what we might imagine it was. And even Augustine seems to think that these, what he calls the merciful ones, are very, very numerous. But there is an institutional imperative there too. As the church becomes the church of the empire, there are two groups of people that it's especially useful to try to bring into order. One would be the very crassly, stupidly fractious, violent, dangerous people who need to be scared straight. This is the way people would think. But also there are those who are, ask too many questions. So that's one reason why it's almost inevitable that the harshest picture would be the one that would win out in the end. Behave, because the consequences of not being obedient children of church and empire are worse than you can even imagine. There are also there are other reasons. There are those who honestly believe that this was more or less what the church, what the scripture said, although there really weren't. There are some who have a sense of justice. I'm not going to deny that either. This is a small number, I have to say, in my experience, but those who don't like the idea of hell, but they certainly like the idea of Hitler going to hell. They have
Mm-hmm.
a sense that there's some things that are evil enough that it's not an odious idea. But then, troublingly enough, in my experience, the one other reason, also in the book I mentioned that it does give us a beautiful mythology, doesn't it? I mean,
Mm.
heaven, hell, and everything in between. I mean, it's a pretty
Right.
sublime picture of reality, and every system of belief does like to give us a mythology to feed on.